Welcome into the Action Network podcast. We are presented by BetMGM. Brendan Glasheen in the host chair, joined by Billy Ward and Sean Zerillo. That means it's time for another round of UFC betting previews, UFC best bets for UFC Louisville down at the KFC Yum Center in Louisville, Kentucky. We'll make our way through the card, look at the fight of the night, some underdogs, some props, and we'll get out of here with some best bets. We will begin, gentlemen, with the middleweight main event on the main card. Jared Cannonier against Nasruddin Imavov. Sean Zerillo, I will turn to you first. When you take a look at this, it's a very tight line. It's basically about a pick'em. Cannonier at just over plus money, plus 105. Imavov at minus 125. How do you assess the head-to-head, and how would you like to bet it?
So I'm going to be betting the fight to end inside the distance at plus money. Middleweight bouts in the UFC typically end inside the distance at about a 59% clip. That would be minus 140 implied odds. I made the line closer to minus 120. 5-round fight, obviously. Typically, guys who make it to 5-round fights, fighters who fight in main events, are a bit more durable than your average fighter, but you also have the additional 2 rounds, adding into that. So I think it's reasonable to assume a similar finish rate as your average middleweight fight. Or your average fight for that division when you're assessing a 5-round fight. But I don't necessarily think, even though both of these guys have been to decisions several times, Imavov never finished in the UFC, but Cannonier has been knocked down in several of his recent fights. He's also 40 years old. He looks 28. He looks like the younger, potentially the 2 guys. If you put them side by side and you said, who's younger? I'll give you $1 million. I'd have a real tough decision to make. Jared Cannonier is in phenomenal shape. Like, he's the most physically well-looking 40-year-old man I think I've seen, in the UFC. He's tremendous shape, one of the best 40-year-old athletes we've had in the UFC, but he's coming off MCL surgery. He was supposed to fight Roman Dolidze last winter or over October, December, ended up having MCL surgery, pulled out of the fight. This is his first match back, and looked great in his last fight against Marvin Vettori, landed 200-plus strikes, attempted 400-plus strike attempts, landed a few takedowns. So he has a ton of volume. Even though he's in his late 30s, now 40, tons of output for Jared Cannonier, insane power. If Marvin Vettori had any less durability than one of the best chins in the UFC, he would have been put out in that fight. And I have concerns about Imavov's pace and his gas tank in a longer fight. I think he tends to fade a little bit. I think he tends to quit a little bit. And if he doesn't have grappling success here, I think Cannonier might run away with it in terms of volume. So this is mostly going to be Cannonier's long straight punches. He has a 2-inch reach advantage against Imavov's teep kicks. I think Imavov can absolutely have success in the boxing too. Could certainly hurt Cannonier. But I think the longer this fight goes, the more Cannonier has success here. So I like the fight to end inside the distance pre-fight plus money. I also like Cannonier live, maybe not necessarily after the first round, but after the first couple of rounds. I do think you could get a good look at his knee, get a good look at the way he's moving, probably get past the point where he's typically knocked down. When he's getting knocked down, it is early or in that first round, and then he sort of rallies back. So like the fight at end inside the distance, and then targeting a Cannonier live bet. And in terms of round robin bets, I'll probably play Cannonier at knockout at 4-1.
Okay, Billy, you had your UFC luck ratings, which are up right now. You had those earlier in the week, and the lines actually moved a little bit more in your favor in terms of getting a better price on Imavov.
Yeah, and for me, it's 90% of this is just about the age. Like, Sean makes really good points. He's looked great, and in a weird way, almost continued to get better into his late 30s for Jared Cannonier as he came down from heavyweight and light heavyweight and all that. At the same time, he's now 40, and we haven't seen him in a year. So the odds of that age-related cliff having happened since we last saw him go up and up the longer it is between fights. So I really don't love that for Cannonier, plus the MCL surgery. That's a big concern. And then on the other side, everyone's talking about Cannonier being old. Imavov is only 28. In theory, he should still be getting more athletic. He should be getting better as he gets deeper into his career. So it's as much about his progression for me as it is Cannonier's potential regression, which, to be fair, we haven't really seen yet, but it's coming, right? He's 40, probably a bad knee, long time out. Like, there's a lot of issues with that one. If they were closer in age, I'd say this line should be about flipped. I would make Cannonier about minus 120, minus 125. I think there's just enough probability that Cannonier's on the downslope that I'll take the minus 120 on Imavov. And the other factor here, I think it almost reminds me of Roman Hopilov a little bit last week, in that we're expecting a striking match, but one guy is somewhat quietly from Dagestan and can also wrestle really well if and when he needs to, and that's Imavov. It'll be tough to do that against Jared Cannonier, to be fair. But if he can mix in a takedown or two, sap some of that power, I think it'll be pretty smooth sailing after that point. Although I'm worried about the power of Cannonier coming back.
I could actually see Cannonier potentially mixing in takedowns too. He did it to Vettori, who I think most people would have considered the better wrestler than Cannonier going into that fight. He likes the cage clinch or cage push a bunch too. So that's where my concern is with my with my under, my fight 10 inside the distance. I just get worried that they end up like cage pushing, for multiple rounds, and there's enough done that they don't necessarily separate and put them back in striking range. But Billy with the excellent point regarding the age, and I neglected to bring this up, but that there's a number you can put on it. Younger fighter, when there's an 11-year age gap between MMA opponents, younger fighter wins 71% of the time at average odds closer to -150, which is 60%. So there's an 11% advantage compared to the average odds just taking the younger fighter when there's a decade between opponents. So yeah, absolutely. The age factor is huge here. And I think that's just another reason to, if you're going to target Cannonier, I think just wait live. Like I prefer his cardio advantage, but you also get to see how he looks earlier in the fight before you decide to enter or not.
And I think probably the age factor when it's 28 and 40 specifically, that might be like the worst point in that curve, right? Yeah. Because that's when the younger fighter is just coming into his prime and the older is just coming out. Like we have a fight later between a 19-year-old and a 31-year-old or whatever, and they're both kind of equidistant from their prime, just on opposite sides of it. That one's probably not as strong of a indicator as it is when it's like beginning of your prime, definitely past it. That's probably like the worst point to be on that age curve would be my guess.
Completely agree. The only pushback I give with the 19-year-olds, if you're making it to this level at 19, you're probably like sublimely talented, right? So yeah. There's sort of a there's probably like a beginning to that age curve where like if you're 19, 20, like it might be an even higher win rate. But yeah, then once you get into the early 20s when you're probably supposed to start making it at this level, and you're facing somebody who's 30, if you're 22 facing a 30-year-old, 22 facing a 31-year-old, yeah, I'd probably give the advantage to the older fighter there as well.
And also weight class matters, right? Like we always talk about the lighter weight classes being a much steeper decline than Jared Cannonier at middleweight.
Absolutely.
If this doesn't go well for him, maybe he goes back to light heavyweight to fight some older, slower guys. I could certainly see that as being the way to go for him career-wise.
I think him and Jessica Andrade, the only fighters with knockouts across 3 different weight classes. So pretty impressive stat. And what an athlete to be able to get all the way down from heavyweight and just look like this good late in his career and seemingly getting better. I don't know if it's the crystals that he loves, his power crystals or what he's doing, but what an athlete Jared Cannonier is.
Excellent shape. All right, let's go to the welterweight. We've got a good one here that you guys are eyeing, the fight of the night, Miguel Baeza and Puna Soriano. Sean, same question. How do you assess it, and where's the betting angle for you?
Miguel Baeza has a championship caliber skill set, but his chin is going to prevent him from getting there. He's taken a couple years off, took a couple knockouts, took a couple years off. He's been competing in grappling tournaments. He's a very well-rounded skill set. The problem is he didn't offensively grapple enough probably to this point in the UFC. He really likes to strike. He has phenomenal kicks. He's put away fighters with leg kicks. He's the taller and longer fighter in this matchup, and Puna Soriano is coming down a division. Also missed weight briefly on the scales this morning. As Billy said, missed by a half a pound and then had to weigh in again. But don't like that weight cut for him, considering Soriano's game typically falls apart after the first round. He has bad cardio. He's a big hitter, but he's low volume and he has bad cardio. And he comes from a wrestling background. He's had fights in the UFC where he's gotten thoroughly out-wrestled by guys who I wouldn't have considered better wrestlers going into the fight. Maybe better grapplers, but not better wrestlers. So don't really see much in Soriano's game aside from that knockout power. I'm curious to see how that knockout power translates moving down a division, but I don't expect his cardio to handle the additional weight cut particularly well. So I expect Puna, as he typically does, to tire out after round 1. He was finished in round 2 in his past 2 losses. And Baeza is similarly like a guy who builds into the fight. I also expect him to take the first round here a little bit conservatively, considering he's coming off of those knockouts. Take maybe more of a grappling-oriented approach. That would be interesting to see. But he's going to work those leg kicks. He's going to pick apart at Soriano from the outside. And then eventually, as the fight goes longer, he should have a severe cardio advantage. And I expect him to win in either rounds 2 or 3. So big numbers on Baeza. Round 2 plus 550, round 3 plus 1100. Probably also going to play his inside the distance prop at around a pick'em price, either in the round robin or as a straight bet as well. But I like Baeza to get this done in round 2 or round 3. And hopefully those chin issues are behind him after 2 years off, because I really like his skill set. And I hope to see him keep getting bigger and bigger fights, because I think he's very talented. Also, has a great nickname, Caramel Thunder.
That's good. Billy, you have chin concerns?
Chin and inactivity concerns. I will say, and Sean brought it up, I love when these guys who are kind of giving the brain a break and not getting hit for a little while go and compete in these grappling tournaments. You're still doing something of a camp. You're still getting active competition. Like, as someone who's done some grappling tournaments lately, you think you're replicating that in the gym. You're not. When it's not your friend, when it's not the guys that you train with all the time, it's someone else who's really out there trying to win. So that makes me feel much better about Baeza, who should be the better grappler here anyway. If you are not planning on watching this one, which I wouldn't begrudge anyone on a Saturday night, I think the Baeza inside the distance or late stuff that Sean pointed out is probably the sharp way to play it. Or you can do some of the split round props, stuff like that, or same game parlays with over a certain amount of time. I think live is probably the way I'm going to play it, though, just because I'm worried he gets knocked out. And if he's going to get knocked out, it's probably within the first 2-3 minutes. I don't even know that you necessarily need to wait for the end of the first round, especially if it's going his way. But I just want to see him either eat a shot or two, or Puna take that first big, deep, heavy breath, and then I'm going to come in on Baeza. Hopefully it's not a horrible line at that point, so that's going to make my decision. But kind of a lot of stuff I want to bet on this one, so if I end up missing out on some of these waiting for live, I'll be okay with it.
Also want to see the approach he takes, too. Make sure that he is a little bit more conservative with it. He was knocked out by KS Williams. He was winning that fight. Then he came back 5 months later against Andre Fiallo, and they got in a dirty boxing exchange, and he's like, let's go uppercut for uppercut, face to face in a phone booth, and he got knocked out. It's like, dude, you're a huge favorite. Why are you trading uppercuts in the pocket with this guy who his only win condition is, to knock you out? So yeah, that was a very bad fight IQ mistake for Baeza, and another fight where he was favored. But I think people see the skill set, they see the talent, they just want to see the fight IQ and the durability to go with it. Because if it's all there, like he has the entire skill set, just worried about the chin. And we'll see. Maybe give him a pass after a couple of years off. Maybe he can make another run, coming back after a couple of years. So I'm hopeful, and I think he's a very talented and fun fighter to watch.
Okay, very good. So there are your main event and fight of the night breakdowns. Let's go to Underdogs. How was this week for dogs, Sean?
I think it could be a really, really good week for Underdogs. There's a lot that I'm eyeing. There's a couple that Billy's eyeing, including his best bet. So I'm just going to run down the list here of all the Underdogs I'm considering betting. Some I think are better live bets than pre-fight bets. Some I think are better, small pre-fight bets into a live bet. Some I think are just better betting straight into, the fight. So curious how Billy reacts to some of these, but just going to run down the list. Charlie Radke at plus 200. One of my preferred. He's facing Carlos Prates, who's a dangerous striker. Prates is 5 inch taller, has a 7-inch reach advantage, but Radke here, to me, has all the grappling upside at plus money. So I think he's worth a pre-fight bet at plus 200. I think he's worth betting live after round 1 if he survives the damage from Prates. Dustin Stoltzfus is plus 230. He's facing Bruno Ferreira, who also is a dangerous striker. Ferreira, the much better athlete, much bigger puncher, but he's never won a fight past the 6-minute mark. I don't even think he's been past the 6-minute mark in his professional career. So definitely a live bet on Stoltzfus. Absolutely. He can fight for 15 minutes. He can wrestle for 15 minutes. Just think there's a pretty good chance. He's pretty stiff. He's not very good mover. I think there's a decent chance he gets knocked out in round 1. So probably small pre-fight on Stoltzfus into a live bet on Stoltzfus. Cody Stamann, one that Billy's going to touch on, so I won't go too deep into it, but grappling upside of plus money in a fight that is heavily favored to go to a decision. He's faced a much better strength of schedule. His opponent has a 9-inch reach advantage, and I don't love the damage that Stamann does on the ground, so this could be one of those where Stamann gets more control, gets more takedowns, Lapalus lands more strikes, and you get a wonky split decision. But getting plus 240 on Stamann in a fight likely to go to a decision, likely to be difficult to score, I think absolutely interesting. Denise Gomez missed weight this morning, also by a half pound. Her opponent is 10-0, has 9 finishes, has 1 split decision on her record. I don't trust Mora's cardio. So if this fight extends, I think Gomez is live after the first round. So another bet, Gomez probably pre-fight small. I expect her to give up takedowns. But if she's there after the first round, I think she's going to turn this into a scrap. So you probably get a better number after round one, almost certainly get a better number after round one. And I'd definitely be targeting that live bet. But Denise Gomes, I think, is live. Two more we got coming. So John Castaneda, even money against Daniel Marcos. Marcos is 15-0. Interested to see a fighter who's 15-0 line at even money against John Castaneda, who to me is a solid gatekeeper, like a really well-rounded fighter, but doesn't do anything phenomenally. But he's the more proven guy here. This fight is also favored to go to a decision at about -215. So again, another close competitive fight, favored to go to a decision. I think underdog Castaneda worth a look. And then finally, Dominic Reyes. We'll talk about that fight more in a moment. But This is like, how shot is Dominic Reyes? You know, how shot is this chin? I believe he took some time off after his most recent knockout. If he doesn't get knocked out, this is a 50-50 fight at worst, if not favor Reyes. He's faced a better strength of schedule. He may be the more skilled guy. I think it's pretty competitive. It just comes down to how shot his chin is, and you're getting +200 on him in a fight that skill-wise I think is 50-50, aside from Reyes potentially having a compromised chin. So going to be a lot of people betting on Jacoby by knockout this week, and I think it could be a trap like Morono by knockout was last week against Nico Price. We'll see. But it's a very similar situation where you're just like, you see this guy, you expect his chin to be fully shot. You expect the first time he gets cracked, he goes down. But what if he doesn't? If he doesn't, I think it's competitive. So Dom Reyes +200, interesting as well.
First fight for Reyes since November of 2022.
Yeah, took 3 straight knockouts. Got ate those body kicks. So he had a very close competitive fight with John Jones. A lot of people thought he won. I think Jones won 3-2 probably. But then he came back, lost interim title fight against Jan Blachowicz, or that might have been for a vacant title.
Right.
Yeah, ate some body kicks, ended up getting knocked out, but didn't get put out, right? You know, body kicks wore him down. Jan knocked him down. The referee stepped in. Then he knocked out Yuri Prochazka, but Yuri popped back up because he's superhuman and landed that spinning elbow on Dom. That was a bad knockout. And then he came back a little bit too quick, fought Ryan Spann, got KO'd bad again. So, yeah, I just think people don't think he can take a punch anymore, but maybe with a little bit of time off to heal that brain, he got himself back in fighting shape. So we'll see. You know, it's just not one of those things that you know until the guy gets hit. But everybody is betting Jacoby by KO this weekend, and I think it could be a drop.
Okay, more on Reyes, as Sean said, in a few minutes. Billy, you do have some underdog crossover.
Yeah, a lot of these, and you know, Sean and I frequently talk about it with women's fights that we expect to go to a decision. We say, hey, it's going to be tough to score. Judges don't know what they're doing. You're getting big plus money. I think 2 of the longer odds are on men's fights, and they're the 2 that I'm looking at here. It's also really important to note that this event is in Kentucky. I can't remember the last event we've had in Kentucky. When the UFC travels outside of their typical areas, that's when the judging gets especially wonky. I mean, somebody last week gave Paulo Costa like 4 rounds in the Sean Strickland fight. Oof. When they were in New Jersey. There was some horrible judging. We got lucky in that it didn't actually give the wrong guy the win, I didn't think, in any fights last weekend, but it was super close and scary on that. So 2 that I like, Cody Stamann, perfect example of what we're talking about, likely to go to decision. Lapilus has been taken down like 7 or 8 times in his 2 fights since he came back to the UFC. Stamann was originally a wrestler, short little stocky guy, built for wrestling. Doesn't always do it, which annoys me, but like if he does the thing he's good at and his opponent's bad at and just does that and doesn't try to get cute, pretty clear path to victory at big plus money. The other one I really, really like here is Jesse Butler. He's moved all the way up to plus 500. Jesse Butler is the guy who stepped in on like 2 days notice to get knocked out by Jim Miller a couple events ago. It was his UFC debut. He had 3 days notice. That was 2 weight classes up from where he's fighting now. Way smaller, fighting the guy with the most fights in UFC history. We don't know that he's bad. We just know that he wasn't prepared for that moment that he found himself in at the time. He's fighting Brad Katona, who I continue to talk about on this show. Recent winner of the Ultimate Fighter, twice actually, 2 of the recent seasons. I don't think those guys are very good because the more talented fighters come in through the Contender Series. Between his 2 runs in the UFC, Katona is officially 3-3. 2 of those 3 wins were in the championship bout of the show against another guy who only got in because of the Ultimate Fighter. So I don't really look at those as true UFC fights, which would put him at 1-3 by my fuzzy math here. And then Katona's got his weird super short arms, just trying to outpoint you thing that's not going to, it doesn't play well to the judges in general, I don't think. Especially these weird judges that we have no idea who they are, how accurate they're going to be. Butler's probably going to be a little bit more aggressive, going to be the bigger guy at 135 versus seeing him as the smaller guy. 5-1 is just crazy on him. You know, I would play him at like plus 250 if that was the line. So at plus 500, this feels like a steal. Obviously only betting like half a unit on it because we're getting such a big return, but very excited about this one.
All right. Let's head over to props, and Zerillo will pick it up on Dominic Reyes and how that where you see value on the prop market.
Yeah, the over 2.5 rounds, and also Reyes by decision of plus 600. I think the decision lines for Reyes and Jacoby should be flipped. I saw Jacoby at about plus 250 by decision and Reyes at about plus 600. I think Jacoby's, knockout prop should be even money, and his decision prop should be 4-1. And I think both of them should have pretty equal decision equity. I don't think it should be plus 250 and plus 600 for Reyes. I think they should both be about plus 400, plus 450 to win by decision. So I made this fight to go to a decision closer to, I want to say 40-45% of the time. So getting the over 2.5 at about plus 125 was within range for me. And then Reyes by decision will be a round robin bet most likely. I might even poke it small straight at plus 600. We'll see what I end up doing with the money line. That'll determine whether I fire on Reyes by decision or not. But yeah, all those sort of correlated. If Reyes doesn't go down from the first few exchanges in this fight, I think it's very competitive. And I think it's very likely that he takes a decision if it goes all 15 minutes. So definitely some juicy props. The over 2.5, like not as much of a fun sweat at plus 125. Even the fight to go to a decision at slight plus money, not the most fun sweat. You almost would have wanted with Reyes' chin, you almost would have wanted the price that you got on that Morono price fight last week, which was like plus 200 on the GTDs. So the price isn't as exciting. I think that Reyes decision bet probably the best or the most mispriced of these props.
How about you, Billy? Where are you eyeing props for the weekend?
Yeah, real quick, because I didn't touch on it when we were doing the underdogs.
Sure.
I think Reyes by decision probably is the way if you're not betting it live. Like, there's so many of these where I'm like, just wait and bet it live. It's the better way to do it. But again, not everyone's watching. Not everyone's comfortable doing it with the tape delay. If Reyes is not physically and mentally broken from the John Jones fight, which is debatable, he's the way better fighter here. Like, he's more talented, more ability. So, yeah, I love that angle if you had to play it pre-fight.
Decision only market too. I mean, considering he's such a big dog here, or like the odds are so wide, in the two decision props, I think Reyes decision only could be worth a look too.
Yeah, no, that makes, any of that logic, I am totally with. The one I'm looking at, Sean mentioned this being on the underdog between Bruno Ferreira and Dustin Stoltzfus. Bruno Ferreira's longest fight in his career was like 6 minutes and 8 seconds or something. Win or lose, right? He's 9-1 as a pro. He comes out guns blazing, somebody's getting knocked out. And then as Sean pointed out, what if he doesn't? Stoltzfus is, I think, probably a pretty significantly better grappler here with a lot of submission threat. Can't really wrestle, though. So that's a little bit scary on Stoltzfus. But say they find their way to the ground somewhere in there, you can get Stoltzfus submission covered. Again, submissions are also likelier to happen early in the fights. The guys aren't as sweaty. They got more juice left in the arms to squeeze. There's a lot of reasons that that's probably going to end early. And then if we get to the end of the first round or so and Ferreira has some big moments but doesn't put him away, then I'm coming in on Stoltzfus live, which I would be very surprised if you're not seeing a better price after round one on Stoltzfus, assuming it gets that far. So I like the minus 130 on the under 1.5 just because it's better odds than Ferreira by knockout, which I thought was a little bit surprising because if he's going to knock him out, that's probably when it happens. Then you can kind of cover your bases where if you don't get that under 1.5, you're probably getting Stoltzfus, unless Bruno Ferreira is somehow a cardio monster that we just haven't seen, but that seems pretty unlikely. The axiom is if you don't know if a guy's good at something, it's probably a weakness. Like, we can't say that for sure, but it's usually not. They don't have some hidden talent that they're not showing us because they're out here trying to win fights.
I think Stoltzfus and Raggy both very likely to get a better live price after round one. The reason why I want them a little bit pre-fight is what if they land the takedown right away, and they win the round, or at least they get significant top time and put themselves out of trouble and show that they can consolidate that takedown for future rounds. Like, that price is going to plummet and go closer to even money. So definitely want a little bit on both pre-fight, but absolutely I would expect to get a better live price on both. And I think their win condition is likely later, both Raggy and Stoltzfus. And they're probably my two favorite of the underdogs that I listed out, but I will find a way to bet on all 6 of the ones that I mentioned in some fashion. I think this is a good card for underdogs. Billy even took the biggest underdog on the card, and he has one more for his best bet. So this could be a dog-heavy weekend after the UFC's been pretty chalky, it feels like, in recent weeks.
Yeah, the only reason I'm not coming in with the pre-fight bets on all these that I like live is because I'm going to have so many underdogs anyway that I don't want.
And the undercovers
20 units out here, and I'm still trying to add. It's like, I'd rather miss out on one because he did too well early and go, okay, we'll get the next one rather than just be overextended here all weekend.
Yeah, and the undercovers you as well for those outcomes. So it's, you're just doubling down at that point basically on Ferrer's win condition.
All right, gents, let's wrap with best bets. 2 sides. Zerillo, you can go first.
Ludwig Klein at -130. This guy is a walking pharmacy. I think he benefits from the post-USADA era of the UFC, but he also looks much better since moving up to lightweight from 145. He's added a lot of muscle. I think he has better cardio at 155. Thiago Moises has faced the better strength of schedule. He's faced Islam Makhachev, was competitive with Makhachev, took him down, but went to a 4th round with Makhachev. But Klein is the much better striker. He's got a 2-inch reach advantage, and I think he has enough defensive wrestling to keep this on the feet. Moises is the better grappler, but he doesn't have a good wrestling game. He's going to need to find the back, find a standing body triangle, do something to get this fight to the ground. Otherwise, Klein is going to pick him apart. He's the stronger guy. As I said, he's the better striker, and I think he has enough first-layer takedown defense to keep this fight on the feet and counter wrestle, sprawl, and brawl, and win this matchup. I think he has solid fight IQ too. We've seen Ludwig Klein in other fights mix in takedowns when he has the grappling advantage, but when he knows he's the better striker, he looks to counter grapple and strike. So I like his fight IQ. This is a guy who was considered a high-level prospect when the UFC signed him. Had a little bit of a rough start, in his run in the promotion before he moved up to 155, but now he's 4-0-1 in the division. I think he's found his form and coming into his own. And one other thing to note with Thiago Moises, this is a guy who trained at American Top Team for a long time. He didn't spend this camp at ATT. He went back to Brazil per his wife's request. She wanted to be closer to home. I don't love him coming away from one of the best camps in the sport, some of the best coaches in the sport, but also the place he spent so much time throughout his career. So probably didn't have the best training camp relative to what he's had in the past. So really like Klein in this spot at -130. I think he's much more durable, should land much more damage. And I also like his ITD prop inside the distance at about +175. That'll be a round robin piece for me.
Okay. And Billy, as Sean teased, you've got another underdog for a best bet.
Yeah, I do. And this is definitely a final bet. You kind of could have subbed out any of these underdogs as best or pretty equal on all of them, but this one's a little bit tighter, so I use that as the last one. I like Zach Reese at +120. There's a lot of unknowns in this fight because Zach Reese looked really good on the Contender Series and was probably winning his fight against Cody Brundage, had him locked up in a triangle, and then got slammed and knocked out. I don't want to say that's a fluke, right? It's hard to pick a guy up over your head and slam him on the ground, render him unconscious. But it's not something that you expect to see all the time in a UFC fight. It almost looked like he hit the support under the cage, like just at the wrong spot to knock himself out, where had it been a couple inches either direction. Very talented submission grappler, can strike a little bit. It's got some reach here on Julian Marquez. I don't know what's going on with Marquez. I think his last win was over 3 years ago. The guys he beat are Smiling Sam Alvey, who had lost 14 in a row or whatever, somewhere in there. Maki Pitolo, who had one win in the UFC and got cut since then. We've never seen Julian Marquez really do it against another high-level opponent. Also has a lot of wins by submission. I believe all 3 in his UFC, but doesn't really have the takedowns to make that happen. So unless you're going to shoot on him or take a bad shot, he doesn't really have a way to set that up. I think Reese can probably stay on the outside. We got to remember this is the bigger cage because it's on the road and at the granddaddy of them all, the UFC or the KFC Yum Center. Every kid grows up dreaming about getting their first fight at the Yum Center. But basically, there's so much unknowns here that I would take plus money on either side of this fight. Whichever guy you're offering me plus money on, I'm going to take it. Reese, I also think a little bit younger, a little bit probably hungrier, up and coming. Reason to believe that he's on the come up of his career. Got a UFC check, can probably train full time now, whereas he couldn't before. Where Marquez, kind of a weird UFC run. Sean likes to talk about his fumbling of the bag with Miley Cyrus. Lot of interesting tidbits about Julian Marquez, but haven't seen him win a fight in over 3 years.
Yeah, and he dealt with a ton of injuries even prior to coming back. He was losing that fight to Maki Pitolo. I had Maki Pitolo. He was my best bet. And Julian submitted him in round 3 after getting dominated and losing minutes for the first 2 rounds. So he hasn't even been that effective even since returning. He didn't look great in the Sam Alvey fight. Just wanted to note, I thought it was funny that you said, how often does the slam happen to the UFC? That Zach Reese-Cody Rudich fight was immediately following the Drakkar Klose Joe Selecki fight, where Drakkar Klose also knocked Joe Selecki out via slam. So that Dariush Sarukian card was wild. The back-to-back slam knockouts, and then Sarukian's knockout over Dariush. That was a fun card looking back on it. But just wanted to point that out. It was funny to hear you say how often does that happen when we had them in back-to-back fights on that card. But those are the only 2 that I remember happening in the past 5 years or so.
In 4, I'd say 4 or 5 years, I think, since we had another one. So my tinfoil hat conspiracy theory is there was something harder under the canvas in that cage than there typically is. There's just something going on there, because how often do you see that? But
yeah, Austin, Texas, that's where that card took place. So keep it note.
Oh, also real quick, just because I looked it up, Julian Marquez 3 submission wins in the UFC, 0 takedowns in the UFC. So you kind of have to bad fight IQ your way into a submission against him. He's not going to make it happen. So just if you don't do that, you'll probably be okay, which I'm hoping is Zach Reese's plan, although I'm nervous because he likes to grapple as well.
Yeah, Marquez hits hard, and Reese to me has that tall man defense that concerns me. He's never been knocked out other than the slam, but just the way he fights, I just look at him and I'm like, this guy seems like he's kind of fragile. Maybe he isn't. But just looking at him, it doesn't look like he could take a punch, but we'll find out. I need more information on him. So this fight's probably a pass for me. The model wants me to bet Marquez. I think it's because of, the past form and the fact that he's such a veteran, but I'm probably going to pass on this fight.
Okay, very good. That is going to do it for our UFC betting preview. UFC Louisville, down in Louisville, Kentucky at the Yum Center, goes down Saturday, starting at 5 Eastern with the prelims, main card at 8 p.m. You can catch the main card over on ESPN. For Sean Zerillo and Billy Ward, Brendan Glasheen, be sure to find these guys in the Action Network app. Should they add anything live, a lot of live discussion here on the podcast, so be on the lookout in the Action app for that. We'll be back at it next week. Thanks for tuning in to our UFC betting preview here on the Action Network podcast, presented by BetMGM. You'll have a great weekend. Best of luck.